I'm coming up with how the characters respond and what those responses would be interesting, and then figuring out what they're responding to almost. So
Nice.
playing it sort of backwards functionally, but that actually leads to, at least in my book, a much more compelling writing. For example, on Black Summer. So Black Summer, I was one of 4 writers on that. It was a very small team. We were involved in every facet of it. It was a really satisfying production. John Hyams and Abram Cox were incredible to work with, and of course my father. But one of the things I found really exciting is I got to be involved with every single facet of that production and every single script. But then specifically, I was tasked with episode 7. That was my baby. That was the one that I was writing cover to cover on my. And so episode 7 of season 1 is called The Tunnel. And for me, the goalpost of it was your main character, like their whole season arc comes to its crescendo 2/3 of the way through this episode. And that's like, so everything that John and Abram have been setting out for the first 2/3, like Carl and John wrote the pilot, and then Abram and John checkerboarded for the rest of the season. And then I wrote episode 7. Because John and Abram were also directing all the episodes. And then episode 8 is the finale, and either Carl and I or John and Carl and I wrote the finale. And so I was getting to do a really interesting thing, which is I was helping track along the entire way, but now it was my job to satisfy all of the creative foreshadowing that had occurred all season. It was my job to turn that into this beacon moment that defined the character. So that's a massive amount of responsibility, one that was very daunting and exciting to take on.
Yeah.
I'm like, and again, it's not to talk sort of out of turn, but I really love the script I wrote, but the way that, just to show that it's a collaborative process, the way it was interpreted by the actor, I, in the end, was not as satisfied by. And so it was, as a writer, it was actually a very important lesson to learn of like, you pour all of your heart and soul into this element, but then you're handing it off. And you have to have the ability to, like, to me, it does not bother me at this point. When that happened initially, it was frustrating. But then I realized, like, it is out of my hands. I'm part of a process. And until I'm at a point in my career, sort of weight-wise, I can't push back in those moments. I can't raise those arguments. I just have to let them. So as a career exercise, it was a really important moment for me. And what's funny is still, even with that mild frustration, like when people were tweeting about the show, they tweeted about that episode specifically. And even the Stephen King even said it was his favorite episode, and that made my head spin. Like,
oh, I bet.
It was pretty terrifying. And so yeah, it's just that sort of thing of, for me, it was in the first moment where I really had to learn those collaborative elements and the distinction in taking those things personally. And in a lot of ways, luckily, it's allowed me to not take anything personally ever since. It's if things don't go my way, that's just, they weren't meant to go my way. And again, for me, because my satisfaction is not tied to the work, it's tied to the community, it's tied to, it's not tied to the work, it's tied to the effort. But I like the doing of it. I like the being part of the team. I like the being involved of it. So it sort of makes me bulletproof. Luckily, I have not had to work on anything that I'm not very excited about and very proud of. But in that same context, when I've had to make those compromise decisions, it's not as sort of wounding as it would have been when I was earlier.
Did you have any other writers that came to your aid and said, this is kind of normal? Like, is this normal?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My father's got stories about dealing with actors that are truly some of the most horrific, like actors turning in pages that they wrote themselves without telling the writers, and just like producers who were just lying to the crew. And I also, in addition to that, even at that point, I had seen enough of the shenanigans to know sort of, okay, I'm going to let them take it personally, but I'm not going to take it personally. They think they're fighting a war. I'm not even on the same battlefield.